presentation mode from beginning. And I'm on one single screen, so I need to find my taskbar, which is harder than it should be when you're in presentation mode. We're professionals, we can handle this. So quick question while I'm futzing around with the slides. How many of you are administrators of your Microsoft Teams environment? Curious. If you can raise your hand, you can go to chat. Just
we got 3 raised hands and a me, 4 raised hands and counting.
Okay.
I'm impressed. I can see this on the mobile interface.
It's fabulous. I'm about to swing over to mobile as well, so I can keep up with what's going on in chat. Because again, it's the pain of the single screen. All right. So if you're not an administrator of Teams, Jay, what's our total count look like?
It was 6 and counting when I last saw the number pop up.
Okay, fabulous. So if you're not an admin, and Jay has no idea where I'm going with this, but I'm just curious about who we've got here in the audience today. How many of you are owners of Teams? So you may not be a Teams tenant administrator, but you control one or more teams.
So wait, do they drop their hand if they're an owner? Do they?
So yeah, let's clear it. If your hands, or you could leave it up. Yeah, but if you're not a Teams owner, you just manage the whole thing. Pull your hand now. I'm curious about stuff. Because some of the things that Jay and I talk about definitely are going to be focused for admins. But for those of you, if you're like, well, I'm not a tenant admin and I don't ever want to be, or a Teams admin, some of the conversations and the concepts we're going to go through today will absolutely apply to you as Teams owners as well. And if you're a member of Teams, you're just trying to take in all the information you can about Microsoft Teams. Again, just knowing what's possible inside of Teams is kind of a big deal. So I just kind of was curious about who we've got, what's going on out there, and kind of where you sit inside of the product. So that was the whole point of going through that.
I think in 30 seconds, I'm going to be able to present if you want me to, Joy.
That's amazing. I'm going to go to this.
So for those of you who have been kindly tolerating the 7-minute delay here due to my tech, I'm talking and no, I'm good.
You good?
So turn off. There we go. Hey, I'm on the right computer at least. Thank you. This is like to start our presentations. So one thing that I want to point out is, and Joy, would you mind going to the baby slide real quick? So the goal of today, which I was intrigued by the track placement, not at all incorrect, because we're talking about what you need to know in order to administer these teams. But I'm intrigued by it because there is a governance track. And actually, while that's not how we have it labeled on this screen, this is a presentation about how to govern your teams. And it is a business conversation, which is something that a lot of people, not all technical people, understand the business side very well. It's not their specialty. And I start with this because I have a number of people on my team who are super technical, but I would not have them lead a business discussion. And so as you are sitting here wondering where we're going with this, I thank you for giving us the opportunity to have a shared business technical conversation in what you might have walked in expecting to be a deep technical conversation. And Joy, I took over your slides so that you should be able to now just use your computer and not have to double screen.
It's amazing. Thank you.
But I can't hear you. All right. So my name is Jay Leask, and I am at AvePoint Public Sector. I'm the U.S. federal team. I run a gamut of capabilities here, everything from project management to business analysis to architect to including sales. I am the director of sales for our national security team. But we don't talk about that. I understand that that turns people off, especially technical people. I have a technical background and I love being part of the tech. Joy, would you like to say hello?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone.
You're
Joy
muted again.
Apple. Muted.
Am I messed up?
I don't show
Oh, you
you.
gotta be kidding me. All right, you keep talking. Just ignore me.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Perfect. Thank you for the confirmation of sound. But I am the director of customer and partner success for a company called Orchestrate. And my focus in my 15 years of working with Microsoft products and technologies has, until Microsoft 365, been SharePoint, but then SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive, collaboration, information architecture. Jay and I are both information architecture nerds. And we have a passion for the business. We have a passion for helping the business and IT work together, because we all know hashtag better together.
Yeah.
So we're super excited to be here. The Minnesota User Group always puts on an amazing workshop day. So thank you for picking our session to come join with us.
Yeah. And part of the reason that I want to make sure that we talk about those roles, those backgrounds that we have is proper governance requires a technologist to know the capabilities of the tool, to know what can I do in PowerShell, what do I do in the admin center, where am I going to need a third-party tool. It requires an information management nerd like the two of us. It requires someone to understand, hey, this team is going to have this kind of information, and therefore it's really going to require us to take a different approach to things than simply turning it on and off, creating it, deleting it, all of that stuff. And so we hope that what you get out of today is an understanding of like what is information governance as it relates to Microsoft Teams, and what considerations do I have to really think about. And please ignore the bottom right corner, the caveat there. That feel free during the post production to just put a white square over that altogether. No, I'm kidding. Don't do any
No,
post-production
let
work.
me go find anything of Erica's
That's
that you
true.
can find, read it and consume it, and thank us later.
That is very true. All right, so what are we going to do today? We are going to talk about why information management and governance are an essential pair. You can't simply just administer your stuff if you want to scale. We're going to talk about what information management is in Microsoft 365 and some critical strategies for it. So again, not deep technical discussion, more about strategically how do we approach it. So gonna discuss a few, there we go. Sorry about that. We're gonna discuss a few examples of why information governance is important in this conversation. And it's not just how do I administer my team. The first one is all about an organization which rolled out Microsoft Teams globally. It was actually a great story. It's one of my favorite stories. They had huge success in rolling out Microsoft Teams. From a technical perspective, they knew that they needed different teams out of different data centers because of rules like GDPR. They knew that they needed a process for lifecycle. What they didn't think about was how are people going to identify whether a team is relevant for them and who should be allowed in it. So in this particular case, what happened was someone in their Singapore office created a team for HR, specifically for HR in Singapore. Now, that's fantastic. And the whole team started using it. The whole organization, HR organization in Singapore started using it. But what went wrong was when they created this team, they literally called it human resources. They did not identify that it was a human resources organization in a particular location. So when someone who traditionally works outside of the Singapore team and also works with people in Europe, invited one of their French colleagues into the team. They were not thinking about data sovereignty. They were not thinking about privacy laws. They were simply thinking, I need to work with this person. So they invited someone in from a French counterpart, and very quickly that French counterpart went, "Oh, this is the AHR team. Why isn't my whole team here?" And so they started bringing people in. And if you're familiar with information governance at all, you might imagine what can happen here is that in their case, they immediately had European person's data added to this HR team, which was not in a European data center. So they had this problem of not sprawl in and of itself. They had a problem of a complete misunderstanding of the purpose. And because there was no governance in place to ensure that only the right people were added to the team, to ensure that there was a naming convention followed for department-based teams, because of those kinds of lack of governance, we now had a problem with European person's data. We had what would be called a data spill.
Yeah. And it's kind of crazy, isn't it, that teams will let you create 50 human resources teams. And we know in the background, you can see that it's appending these special characters, and there's things where it's not identifying all those things as the same object.
Mm-hmm.
But for those of us that are in the user interface, we're not seeing the voodoo in the background. I'm going to go into I'm in human resources. So I'm going to go to the human resources team that I know where it is, or
Yep.
the one that I'm a member of, and that's where I'm going to work. It's amazing what just how powerful a good naming convention
Yeah.
can be.
Yeah.
And I've got a
So
question in chat. I'm curious if anyone is using naming policies now, and if you are they suggestions? Like, please put PROJ in front of a project team, or is it a rule where you don't have a choice? There's going to be one.
yep. So Joy, well, we hopefully get some answers to that coming in. I think this one is from one of your past projects.
It sure is. I had a customer, we were helping roll out teams and doing adoption stuff, and it was great. And kind of sent them on their way when they needed me. They said, hey, call me, come help. I got a call. We've created a team and nothing works. That was the email. We've created a team and nothing works.
Oh, I love technical support calls.
Right? Okay, so shoot me some days and times where we can get together and let's look at it, because I really can't give you much advice at this point. So we hop on a call, and the idea was they were going to create one team for the entire department. I don't remember what it might have even been IT kind of doing the dog food thing. So one team for the entire department, and then a private channel per functional area of the department. Okay. Well, if you've not really gone down the team's path before, that probably sounds like a very logical way to do it. Except that now no one can use the OneNote notebook. Nobody can use the planner plan. Nothing works because you've taken this beautiful Microsoft 365 group that is a security service, and you've torn it to pieces, right? You've shredded it because 5 people here, 3 people here, 10 people there, 12 people there. You can't use those resources well. So it was a lack of understanding more than anything of when should you use a private channel, when should you use a team, and right, what do people really truly need? What's the best way to guide our end users, our business departments through the creation of these workspaces?
Yeah, so 2 lessons already, right? If you're going to have people creating their own names, you got to provide some form of either guidance or rules as to when to do it. And we'll talk about some of the tools as well a little bit in passing. And I like this one, right? Like, you got to teach people why to use the tools. Of course, one of my one of my sales executives, when we rolled teams out 3.5 years ago, the first thing he did was create a new team for every single one of his accounts, which in his head, as the center of his universe, was great.
Sure.
But for the 100 people who support him across all of his accounts, who just got added to 40 different teams, we were all like, stop right there.
You're at a
Nobody
10.
copy this model. And so that became our wake-up call of, we got to provide some guidance. Like, how do we want people to use teams versus channels versus eventually private channels, et cetera? Absolutely. So two very good things there. The third case study, the third example that we want to talk about is on the audit and compliance side. So I work on the federal side a lot. And so when I was talking with a customer of ours, they were talking about rolling out teams, and their IT, I was talking to a records manager, and the IT team, the IT organization had set a policy that teams were transient. They would be, their life cycle was 3 years, no more, no less. No more. So the records managers went, that's great. We don't want sprawl. We don't want things that don't need to exist. Give people a chance to say, no, I still need it, and move on. But what happens when there's a record in that team? The IT organization wants to make sure that something that's no longer needed is deleted, but there is anywhere from 1 to 1,000 to 10,000 files inside of that team that our rules say need to be kept for 3, 7, 25 years, even permanently, and shipped off to NARA. And so what they found out as IT was pushing out their organizational policy was that, I love this person who keeps walking behind you, by the way. was that they needed to work together, not just IT doing technology things, but the RIM team, the Records and Information Management team, providing feedback as to, okay, well, when that's deleted and there's a record inside of it, I need the record stored over here. And so thankfully they caught it ahead of time. Now, it was a 2-year journey from when IT created their policy to when there was agreement on how to actually handle those records. But that's absolutely, I think that was his hat.
Oh.
It looked a bit like he had a fan on his head, though.
Yes.
So a third case here where not only have we talked about naming conventions and the general policies of your team, not only have we talked about the security side of things and why to use each piece, but now we're talking about, what do we do with the information inside? And that's why this concept of information governance is so crucial in the success of this technology. It's not just the technical governance of our object, it's also the understanding of what is in that object and how does that need to be treated at the data level so that we know what we're doing. So we follow 5 basic strategies in making sure that you have a good framework to governing your stuff. First, understand what you have. And you need to make sure that you know, these are our teams. This is how they're used. This is who they're owned by. Simply allowing everyone to create a team, but not figuring out, well, okay, is this team operational, mission critical, departmental? Was it created by someone in HR on behalf of someone in sales or legal? Like, understanding that helps you to understand what kind of policies need to get put on it. You need to implement a classification schema so that you can put the right policies on that, so that you can protect the data, make sure it's only shared with who should see it, etc. Yes.
So, and as we're going through this, like, the phrase just popped through my mind: knowledge is power. Right? Because if you go through and do that step 1, right, and you map out what you have, you know what you have, well, that's power now to give you information you can then act on, right? Once you know, then you act.
Yeah.
Once you see it and map it, you know where it is and how to treat it. I have had customers to go like, oh, well, we'll just say everything's a record, or we're going to put on like in place lit holds and stuff like that to keep people from deleting things.
Never delete anything. That's always been my favorite federal policy, is we just don't delete anything. I mean, that's actually not what you want to do.
That's a lawsuit waiting to happen.
That is, yeah.
Right. But yeah, and you'll kind of see again and again, and I think I see something in chat that I like the look of, knowing. Didn't G.I. Joe say that knowing is half the battle? So sorry to interrupt you with my tangent, but there's
Oh,
power in knowing what's going to happen, being able to identify, like you said, naming convention. If I know it's a project, I know how to name it. And now I know what it is when I see its name in Teams.
yes.
There's a lot of power there.
It is. And knowledge is currency too. It's not just power, right? Like it is the knowledge that your organization has, especially in the private sector, maybe not as much in the public sector. The knowledge that your organization has is how they make money. The people are what have knowledge, they are what act on knowledge, but that intrinsic knowledge itself is, oh, I like the dollar sign there. The intrinsic knowledge itself is what your company is making its money off of.
Mhm.
Um, so you got to understand what you have, and you have to be able to match that with a schema, a policy, etc. Then the third piece is actually doing the matching. So now that we know that this belongs to legal and contains sensitive data, and this is our sensitive data policy, you need to make sure you are assigning those policies. And one of the things you'll find that, yes, any administrator can go in and assign those policies. But if you're in a 20, 30, 50,000 person organization waiting for, waiting for the report to tell you a new team was created, and then figuring all of that out and manually changing those policies becomes really hard. So the key term there is programmatic. It is when something is created, capture how it's being used, what it's going to have, who it's owned by, and
Mhm.
programmatically put your policies on that as often as is possible. That becomes the fourth bullet. Remove that burden from your IT staff.
Amen. And from your end users,
Yes,
because they've
absolutely.
already got a job that they're doing.
Yep. We had a federal customer. We were talking to them about their governance structure. And I went, okay, so here's what happens. Um, Joe here in my organization goes to it's a 100,000 person organization with many departments. So Joe in my department goes to my ticketing system and submits a ticket for a new team. I approve that. So I get a notification. I approve that it's allowed, which pushes that ticket into the ticketing system for IT because we have different
Ah,
ticketing systems. IT then goes through the approval process, which probably includes a call back to Joe to get information that wasn't collected. I swear to you, like they said those words.
that could be
Um,
better.
right. Then when IT approves it, they send it back to me, who then they make me an owner. I'm the only owner. Me, the IT person of my department, is the only owner of the team. And then I add all of the membership to the team and I give it back to Joe. I said, how
Ah,
long does this take? They're like, at best, 3 to 4 days. I'm like, at best? I had another organization that standing up a new SharePoint site collection took a month, as much as a month, because of the amount of chasing it took to get answers to questions. I'm like, why aren't you asking those questions when the request is submitted, right?
mm-hmm.
So you got to, if I mean, these bullets could be out of order. If you know your classification schema over here, and you know what's going to be assigned, then you can ask questions based on those expected outcomes to make sure that when something is created, you're not creating it until the request isn't even in until you've captured the information you need to make those decisions. And then
And
go ahead.
just to add to that, IT can't know. They can't know what's in the department's mind for what they're trying to make. And
Amen.
it's there to facilitate the business, right? In a perfect world, these processes. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about that. Maybe it's the only beautiful thing about letting anybody create what they want, when they want it, how they want it, and go forth and multiply, right?
Yeah.
That's dangerous on one side, but I know what I want, I'm going to go do it.
Well,
But then you get duplication, and then you get the unhealthy kind of sprawl, and then you get stuff that lives out there forever. But if you have this automate process in place where you can gather all those requirements up front, say,
yeah.
hey, user, you don't get to create a team unless you have two owners because we don't want orphan teams around here. Little things like that. Ooh, IT can't know that.
Yeah. Like what two owners should it be? IT doesn't even care,
Nope.
right?
Just, I mean, please don't pick random people. I mean, we do care a little bit if we're the one that's got to go fix it later. But
Yes. So the last step, and we've spent way more time on this slide than I thought we would, which has been great for me, is this last bullet here. You got to stay on top of what's coming. You got to know what are the new features, what are the new capabilities. You know, if you didn't know private channels were coming out and they just appeared in your tenant, which is how it happens, you could have some major problems, right? Joy had a customer creating private channels left, right, and center and telling her that the system doesn't work correctly. Well, it works correctly.
It
So
works
you
the way
gotta
it was intended to work, but not as
by
it was anticipated.
it's like that QA video with the person who, you know, they've got that kid's block toy and they keep putting a triangle in the square. They just
If it
keep doing it.
fits.
Like, yes, works the way it's intended. So let's talk about mapping and understanding your information, the green circle right there. Raise your hand if you recognize this triangle and not because you've seen Joy and I present on it before. Like this triangle first appeared to me. Joy, put your hand down, Joy.
I saw it before.
This
People
triangle
too.
first appeared. Joy, when's the first time you saw this?
Oh Lord, 2008, 9.
Yep.
Yeah.
I saw this triangle appear almost word for word. The right hand stuff was a little bit different, but almost word for word. I saw this triangle appear with SharePoint 2007 with personal my sites. We don't even change the language. We want that to resonate because that's really like, it doesn't matter if you call it OneDrive or my sites or whatever. It's the same thing. At the very top, you have a corporate portal. It should be tightly controlled. Nobody should be able to edit this unless they have gone through significant training and you really trust them. Like, frankly, your head of HR probably shouldn't be able to edit the corporate portal for HR. They should probably have to go through a process to have those edits made. And you go all the way down to the bottom. You've got your divisions and business areas, which might be part of the corporate portal, depending on how you organize things. It might not be. You're going to want some form of control. You don't want someone in Singapore creating the HR team when really they're just trying to create a localized version, right? One for my localized department, not for the global organization. So you do want a medium amount of control on that, but also you want to enable people to do what they have to do. Mm-hmm. You've got your project and team sites. Like every time I stand up a project, if I have to wait 4 days to a month for my site to get created, hey, Joy, am I going to keep using this system?
Probably not. Pretty slow. I need something today.
Right. And projects start all the time. They don't start quarterly. They start whenever they're needed. And so being able to spin that up as needed is important. But yeah, you still want, like, projects have a beginning and an end date. By default, that's by definition, it's a project. It's not an ongoing thing. So if I have a defined end date, I automatically have a life cycle date. I recommend, as with most projects, you have an opportunity to extend that life cycle because it's possible that the project might continue past the original end date. But still, it has those defined things that you can build policy off of. And then personal, okay, now it's unstructured. You don't necessarily want a lot of control in a OneDrive. If I need to create a new folder, I shouldn't have to come to IT to get my folder created. On the other hand,
in
OneDrive, in my personal my site, Joy. Yeah. On the other hand, I also don't want Joy here, who's a chatty Cathy, to be able to share any file she creates with anybody outside of the organization that she wants to, because it might have sensitive information. So you'll have some form of control, but it is meant to be less structured. And this pyramid is kind of the definition to me of how you should approach information management. Like, where do I need structure? Boom. There you go. You need a lot of structure, you need a little structure, etc.
This slide.
Tell me about this slide, Jay.
You know, there's a lot on this slide, Jay. I see a lot of lines, I see a
Okay.
lot of boxes, but then that's how my brain does. My brain looks at something like that, that it freaks out for a minute until we
Yeah.
find somewhere to focus,
Yeah.
right? But if you break it down then and go publish, right? Just like you were talking about that highly structured and tightly controlled location where we're going to put that corporate knowledge and the information for all employees, where things should not be changing frequently unless it's just a news or an announcement thing, right? We need a place to publish. We need a place for the employees to work, right? You notice we have this layered, tiered structure here.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, and Jay's had different versions of this slide for a few years now. And we've got one that in our like full blown all day information architecture workshop that we do, shameless plug, shameless plug. But we really struggled with site and team,
Mm-hmm.
site and team. And I noticed it all says space now,
Yep.
workspace.
Yep.
But it's identifying what kind of content are we working with? Does it need to be tightly controlled? Controlled by who? Consume. Is it by who or by whom?
Whom?
Whom, consumed by whom? What type of information is it? And these labels that you have here are going to could almost apply to just about any area in your organization.
Yep. So this is a slide. You're right. It is a lot. And I probably should build it layer by layer. But what this slide is all about is helping people understand the concept of designing based on the outcome. So the very first thing that when I'm talking about information architecture with a customer is what types of workspaces do you have? And these are 5 of the standards that we come across in almost every organization. You need a team space for the HR organization to be able to collaborate with each other. It has distinct users, they have specific things they're trying to do, and it is probably organizationally based, right? You need a project space. This is more dynamic. It's going to cross matrix different parts of the organization. It has a life cycle. My team, in theory, doesn't have a life cycle. We stand it up when the organization's created. And yes, when organizational change happens, that might be a trigger, but it is not like every 6 months we're going to have a new team. Every 6 months, we're probably going to have a new project, depending on what you do. Um, then you have communities. Now, you can call them communities of practice or communities of interest or whatever you want to call them. When I was at Booz Allen, we called it the SharePoint user group, the Boss Bug, Booz Allen Hamilton SharePoint user group. And what we did in that community was we had twice monthly webinars where people could showcase what they were doing across their customers, where we had a library where we could upload anonymized statements of work and deliverables that we used with our customers. We had a library of who in Booz Allen's 23,000 people knows SharePoint and what are their specialties within SharePoint. And so you've got these 3 types. Then you have a personal space, like we talked about with OneDrive, where I just need to create something I'm testing out before I share it with a larger group. And then, of course, you have this concept of an extranet, the idea of being able to share externally outside. Um, this conversation, I will sit down and talk with people I'm doing this kind of a workshop with for an hour about the types
Mhm.
of workspaces they need, and we try to bucket everything to as small a group as possible. Now, the key here is your buckets should be based on how you can templatize this.
Yes.
So if it's similar in technological capability, for example, if it's similar in policy that goes with it, how often it should be, how often it should have a life cycle action, or how secure should we make it? Those are the types of workspaces you're going to need so that you can then have that kind of a template in creating your policies, in knowing what questions you need to ask, and in automating the
Mhm.
application of those policies on your users.
And if you are an individual in your organization that's trying to either maybe do a Teams remediation, you've got some stuff out there you need to clean up, you need to go back and work with the departments, with the business groups that have, 5,000 teams for 3,000 employees, right? steal this slide,
Please.
have the conversation, right? Say, do you need to collaborate inside of your team, right? Do you need a place to do projects? Do you need a place? And Jay, we need to put a Yammer/engage icon on the communities, please. It's kind of
Are you literally reading the message I just posted in the chat?
no. Okay, yay. Because I was like, oh, bad consultants. But and do you see how like those three things kind of go up to the tip of that triangle pointing to that internet portal? How much of the content in the project space, in your team space, even in the community should be shared with everyone in the organization to consume? Do they need to know about it? Do you want to let this initiative that your project has done shine, right? Toot your own horn, as we say in the South. So you could definitely take this, use it as a map, use it as a conversation starter.
Oh, okay. I'm going to stop here. So, is it a question? Do you really still talk about SharePoint Online team sites as an option, or just default to a team? It's a beautiful question. I don't actually talk about SharePoint versus Teams versus Yammer versus groups, because I'm in the federal government and there are agencies that still believe groups should have their own role. I don't talk about the technology. I talk about what are you trying to accomplish. We do see SharePoint team sites stood up on their own when it is less of a collaboration space and more of a publishing space, right? Um, but even in cases where for me, for AvePoint Public Sector, we use our SharePoint team site heavily. We have workflows in there. We have specific document libraries for specific cases. We still use, what do we use? Within a document library, we still use document sets. Like that doesn't happen inside of a team. I'm not saying it's the best thing to do. I'm saying it's what we do.
But is that team site tied to a team?
So in this particular case, tied to a team, because there's also a lot of collaboration that needs to happen, a lot of communication that needs to happen. So I will not go to someone and say, do you want a SharePoint team site or do you want a Teams? I ask, what are you trying to accomplish? And yeah, if what they're trying to accomplish really steers me to just doing SharePoint work, I'm not going to stand a team up for them, because it's confusing to have the extra capability. Plus, we can always SharePointify, we can always teamify a SharePoint site later on. I did that backwards.
Yep,
Joy,
yep.
what do you think on that?
Kind of the same, but a little different. I mean, I'm prone to want to say, I'm going to go ahead and have this team set up for you so I can show you a few things. But if you don't want to use it, if you're not ready, hide it.
Yep.
And you can come to it when you're ready. Is that right or wrong? I don't know. I think there's so much contextual stuff here that there may not be an exact right or an exact wrong. But yes, thank you. Hughes, Jason.
You're right.
I was when he said a team site for a publishing thing with no team, I was like, ugh. And then I was like, oh, I made a face. Yeah, a communication site I feel would be more appropriate for that. I feel that that is a correct answer. But again, and I'm a solutioner at heart. I try to fix everything, but you have to, maybe you don't have to, but I encourage you to have the conversation Jay said first. What do you need to do? When I do like strategy sessions with organizations, I try really hard not to ever do a demo during that focus group conversations. My first question might be, how's your email situation these days? Do you wish you could end the day with just one more email? No. Okay. Who do you get emails from? Who do you work with?
Yeah.
What tools do you use? What
Yep.
works great? What
Yep.
just hurts? And then later comes the solution, comes the technology conversation once you know what the end goal is.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, Jason, you are generally correct. I
Oh.
generally stand up a team
Mm-hmm.
and then push people to understand the various capabilities across that and what comes with it. But I also do need to consider, what is this group of people that I'm working with willing to learn and willing to
It's
do?
true.
So that is where, you gotta consider that in what you're recommending to them.
I have a question.
Fire.
Okay, let me think. How do I want, I've got so many thoughts in my mind right now. Um, how many, Zennials? Do we have any Zennials in this call?
Is that what we're calling me now? No,
Isn't
not
that
me.
right, Gen
That's the,
Z? Isn't
yeah.
that, thank you, thank you. So, Gen Z, millennials, right? We can bring them along. So we've got 4 generations of people in the workforce right now. So Jay, 60% of a team might not be like, oh, I don't want chat. I don't want to do this. I'm not going to learn it. But I would say put it out there anyway, make it available, because people my age, and I'm like a really young Gen X or a really old millennial. It depends on which chart you look at. The people that are my age and younger, we're going to bring the others with us,
Mm.
right? Make the technology available. Jay, I don't even remember party lines. Don't be lying. I'm older than you.
I have a story about it that I'm not going to tell to slow this conversation down even further.
But I would
Absolutely
also
remember.
say too, even though we're here to talk about teams and teams administration and adoption and governance and all that really amazing stuff,
Yes,
don't ignore that SharePoint site that's sitting in the background, because not every document your team is working on should be in the files tab of one of your channels, right?
absolutely.
If it's not going to be edited, if it's not going through a lot of work and changes and versions, create a space for it to sit on your team site, right? But that's a conversation for another day. I just felt the need to throw that out there. Don't ignore the SharePoint piece.
I completely agree. And I will give you an example. So no, I won't. Moving on. So when looking at this kind of a thought process, the key here is you are attempting to design what comes out to a governance plan. If someone wants to collaborate with people on a scheduled project across organizations, we are going to by default give them a project site and a team, and or a planner and a team, and we're going to um, set these policies on it, and the project manager has to approve anyone that's getting added to it, right? That becomes your governance plan. Now the key here is, when you come out of this exercise, this is not set in stone. These are not the 10 commandments of how to utilize Microsoft 365 in our organization. This is a guide, and it needs to be reviewed time and time again. Information architecture and governance are not permanent. They will grow. Why will they grow? Well, how often does Microsoft roll out new features? That right there is a trigger for updating your plan. When I worked at Booz Allen, we had a 3-year cycle of how the pendulum would swing. Are we focused on capability, or are we focused on who the customer is? And we would go back every 3 years, and you would see that the entire organizational structure would change based on where the pendulum swung and who was leading us. And that change affects our information architecture and our governance. Not a complete wash, but that's why there's this cycle of, you got to document, what are our scenarios, what are our priorities. You got to then take that and say, this is how we're going to do it, and create a way to execute it. You got to measure that and understand, is it working, is it not? Is it pushing people to go stand up SharePoint in AWS, Azure, or are they utilizing the tools as we intended them to? And then you got to modify over and over again.
Yeah, very little is set and forget in
Mm.
our modern M365 landscape. I love the chat. You guys are coming up with some really great questions. And I think the next section is where it would make sense for us to apply it. There was a question a little while ago
Mm-hmm.
about restricting end users from being able to change sensitivity labels.
Ooh. Can you restrict end users from being able to change document sensitivity labels, Joy?
I feel like off the cuff, I would not be a reliable source for that, but we
Yeah.
can find out. I was hoping you knew for sure. I mean, my
I
heart says surely, yes, but Microsoft goes a little bit too far, and the sheriff and everyone and all the things. So
so whomever that was, uh if you can PM one of us your email, or if you want to tweet one of us, if we're still using that platform today, and let us know. I'm just kidding. Let us know, and we will chase that down and get you an answer. My gut says you can't. But that's a gut feel, not a technical knowledge thing. So let's double check that. So you've identified what you have. You've created a schema to document what it is. You got to have a classification schema, a plan for how do we label things. So when you are doing this, you want to define your classifications. Whether this is records management or sensitivity, you've got to define what they are. You've got to associate outcomes with those classifications. I'm gonna say this. When I worked at Booz Allen, we used folksonomy. We had anybody could create.
yes.
Yeah, well, it's great until you have 7 variations of the same thing because people don't know how to spell.
Sorry.
So what I'm
I
getting
am
at
people.
here, right? So what I'm getting at here is you want to make sure that if you are going to define classifications here, you are going to define these are our classifications. This is our taxonomy, and a process to get it modified when it needs to be. You need to also think about, well, let's talk about, do I need 17 different tags for contract? Or are 16 of them going to have the exact same outcome, and I need one that has a different outcome? So as you define that classification schema to make it easier on the user, make sure you are creating classifications based on the expected outcome. So expected outcome on the record side, I need to keep it for 7 years. I need to export it to NARA after 25 years. On the sensitivity side, only senior level executives should be able to see this information. We can share this information to anyone with an NDA. Those are different outcomes. Therefore, they should have different classifications, different taxonomy that goes with it. Go ahead.
And by no means are we saying that that is easy to
Oh,
have consensus in the organization. 2 years working with the legal team of a large pharmaceutical organization because they had 20 different labels for everything because it meant different things to different people. And finally, sometimes you have to go, no, this ends
yeah.
today. We're just going to all get in a conference room or on a call, and whoever walks out alive wins. Right? Sometimes you really have to push to get consensus and narrow it down as much as possible. The good old golden days of content types can definitely be your friend. But yeah, just know we're not minimizing the struggle that can be involved here. But once you get through that, the payoff is definitely worth it.
Yeah, and I would say this is not an IT. Defining your classifications is not an IT job. Helping,
No.
being a stakeholder in that conversation is, right? Like legal should come to us and say, we need the following capabilities. And IT should say, hey, those capabilities require, those different capabilities are handled this way in the technology, and they each require a different categorization. And now you're
Yep.
working together. But if
Yes.
you, an admin, are sitting there creating the classification schemas all on your own, I mean, unless you're a small organization where you do wear those hats,
Sure.
sure. But I otherwise no.
So we did a workshop. It was in Chicago.
Mm,
And one of the exercises that Jay and I did is we broke the room up, IT in one group,
mhm,
business in another. And
mm.
we asked them to go build out the navigation for an imaginary intranet site. And IT, man, it was dry, hardcore, boring words, and everything was very and the business folks that were in the room, it was a little bit more dynamic, and you could tell that they were trying to build it out. where it was much more intuitive in the way people would think about the content. And then we called, what was it, like 5 or 10 minutes? And then we were like, okay, switch and go work
Yeah.
on each other's boards. They lost their minds collectively because they were like, what is this? This doesn't make sense. And the IT guy actually said, we need more silos in how this is broken down. No, friend, we don't, unless there's a security reason,
Yes. Yes.
right?
Yep. And Pascal, you're absolutely right. Retention will always win over deletion. But there are times where deletion is not only appropriate but necessary. I worked at a company in my early 20s where the results of a legal case said we had to delete everything having to do with that former customer of ours. Had to be deleted. We spent 3 days going through every folder, every file share. It was intense. So there needs to be policies to support that. Jason asked, is there such a thing as too many classifications? Is there such a thing as too few? Do you know the sweet spot?
And I was just starting to type, but we'll talk through it instead. I was like, there's not a definitive answer. And it's kind of similar to people used to say, well, how many columns are too many columns to have someone fill out metadata in a library or a list?
Yep.
For some people, 3 is way too many. For some people, 1's enough. I'm not going to do any more. Some people, they'll do 10. But it's like, what is necessary to be able to perform the desired outcome? What do you need to know to be
Yeah.
able to say, oh, this is a retention in place or archive in place? This is a delete in 10 years. This is a keep for 20 years. What do you have to know? And I would say,
Yeah.
what's the bare minimum that you need to know to be able to get to your desired income for the type of data you have? And I got a thumbs up. Thank you for that. Because I know it's not always a helpful answer. I know you want me to say 5.
7.
I wish, but it depends.
I will follow up what Joy is saying with the following. If you know the regulations, you are going to create tags that are named similar to the regulations. If you know the technological outcome, you're going to create tags that go with the technological outcome. The average user don't know either of those things. So the answer to what's the sweet spot entirely depends on what
Yeah.
are your regulations, your controls, not necessarily federal regulations, but what are the things that regulate what has to happen with your data? What is the technological capability that supports that? And then how do your people work? And that's why this isn't an IT conversation. It isn't a legal conversation. You have to have stakeholders from across the board to decide how to do this. So, yeah,
And
Joy's absolutely right.
my follow-up to Jay's follow-up, the comment that your end users aren't going to know that is not a dig on the end users.
No.
Our end users are not there to be governance experts. That's why we have governance panels or whatever you want to call it, right? The goal is for the technology to be in place and the processes to be in place. So it's just intuitive and it just happens, right? Our end users are not the legal people that are thinking this stuff up or that are tasked with making sure it's applied.
Yep.
I'm not saying
Okay.
you said it as a dig, Jay. I just wanted to.
No. That was a wonderful clarification. I am not upset that you made it. So, you've defined your category, your classifications. You've associated outcomes with those classifications as kind of a secondary step of, do I actually need all of those classifications? That's one way to determine if you have too many, right? The next thing you need to do is, how do I make this easier for the user? How do I classify as much as I can programmatically so the user doesn't have to open a drop down of 75 terms and find whatever they're looking for and hope that it is labeled the way they think of things? There is no right way to do this, but a lot of places a lot of organizations I talk to on the federal side do this by location. So on the one hand, if you can do it at like the team level, when you are creating a team, understand if there is going to be what we call export controlled data. Export controlled data is highly regulated. It's not allowed to be seen by foreign persons. Not everything inside of that team is going to be export control, but because export is so highly sensitive, I could theoretically say everything in this should be treated as if it's export control. And then if someone wants to share it outside of those regulations, we have a process for I'll call it declassifying because that's the language I'm used to, right? We have a process to lower the categorization or the classification so that it can be shared. But that is something that we see a lot of. One of our federal customers for records management, they stand up a document library for every primary type of records that is expected inside of a SharePoint site. And so when you put a record inside of that folder, it automatically gets tagged. It gets tagged as the owning organization, because we know who the owning organization is, because that's categorized at the SharePoint site level. It gets tagged as the status because it's going into a records space. That means it's automatically a final record. And it gets tagged as the type of record it is because that's associated with the document library. And for them, it works because their people are trained to do it that way. It may not work everywhere. So that's another thing you got to think about. But the idea is you've got to try and simplify for the end user as much as you can, as much as makes sense. And there are different strategies for doing that.
And you said a very important word, train.
Yeah.
Teach, communicate. The policy might be out there.
Yep.
Where? Is it findable? Is it consumable? Or is it a 500-page PDF that's just somewhere rotting away?
Yep. All right. And then the last part of this, I can't believe how much we've talked on one slide alone. Classifying your content, you got to make sure that you are ensuring accuracy wherever possible. So we've talked about deploying it by location as an example. Well, then you need to make sure you're running reports that it's being classified correctly, that someone isn't going in after the fact and changing things they shouldn't. On the other side of things, you need it, like we run into this all the time. Something's been classified or categorized as highly sensitive, but then someone went and created a share link that is share with everybody in my organization.
Oops.
So understanding like how has it been categorized and classified correctly, but then how is it being used as well is part of that.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. That's all for me.
I think we're good.
Yeah.
I think we've done that slide justice.
Probably too much. So the next part of this is assigning actions, deploying it across Microsoft 365. So we're talking about teams today. So let's talk about the anatomy of a team. And this is probably not all inclusive just because of how much changes over time. So forgive me if something's missing. Feel free to ask in the chat if you have identified something. But Joy, let's talk about things. Where are, Joy, our conversations stored?
You mean it doesn't actually just live in Teams? So I think it's Sherry Oswald does a session called Nothing Lives in Teams, right? Spoiler alert. But yes, so all of these products that you see here, Outlook, which is where our conversations are stored, or as Jay likes to say in his super fancy speech, journaled in Outlook.
I feel like you're making fun of me.
Say again?
I said, I feel like you're making fun of me, Joy.
No, I'm applauding your use of the English language.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So yeah, so your conversations, they're actually in Exchange, I guess is the right answer, right? Not yeah, my bad. That's actually my fault. They're in Exchange and they're accessible through Exchange. So if it's Teams, it's in the mailbox that belongs to the team. If it's one-on-one chat, it's in the users that are participating in that chat. And this is important for e-discovery. if you do have to do a legal search for everything that has to do with Joy Apple or Jay Leask, you'll use eDiscovery to search for that information. It's going to be looking inside of Exchange. If you are trying to figure out where are my files stored, right? So files are stored in SharePoint or OneDrive. I'm told to say differently than SharePoint because, they're not the same thing.
OneDrive's baby SharePoint.
It's just a subset. Anyway, so they're
What's up?
stored in SharePoint and OneDrive. And you've got it, knowing that allows you to understand, hey, wait. If my files are stored in SharePoint, I've got all that power of a SharePoint site on the back end, automatic tagging, automatic labeling. I've got the power of the security that comes with SharePoint and how we can both track permissions and set permissions. So you have all of that knowledge. And oh my gosh, now that I think about it, this should be changed because now Stream is in SharePoint even.
It sure is.
Yeah, forgot about that. That hasn't been updated
Should
in
have
quite a
been the
while.
whole time, but that's a conversation for another
That
session.
is, I'm not having a conversation about that. And then Joy, what about private or shared channels?
Knowledge is power, right?
Yes.
Knowing, right? Every time a private channel or a shared channel is created, you get a whole new SharePoint site because we're following the best practices for SharePoint permissions, which is you secure the largest object possible. That would be a site in modern SharePoint Online. So we're telling teams, I need a special place to have a conversation with just a subset of the people in my team, private channel, new site. Or I need a place to have a conversation with a larger group of people than just what is represented by the group in my team. Shared channel, site associated with it. So the permissions reflect who is present inside of that special channel type. It will absolutely impact the architecture of your intranet, of your tenant.
Yep.
But it's for a good cause.
Yep.
Permissions.
So knowing all of this, knowing the architecture behind your team, which many of you probably already knew. So thank you for allowing us to kind of walk through that again. Knowing that allows you to figure out, well, what technology can I use on the back end? So you have unified labels. You have the ability to apply sensitivity labels or retention labels. And you can do some of that automatically. Now, one thing you need to think about is that enough data for the outcome that I have? So in a records management approach, often it's not enough to simply know that something is a corporate file. You need to know what type of file it is, because a corporate file might have a 30-year policy, or if it's project based, it might be a 15-year policy. So you need to know what other metadata do you need in order to determine what to do with it. Same thing happens on the other side. So you could have confidential as a status, but if there's a difference between what happens with PII, personally identifiable information, and what happens with a trade secret, if they have different outcomes, you need to consider that they may have to have either a different label altogether, or your label actions might need to also look at other data to determine what to do with it.
Mhm.
So as an example to dig into like why we do this, we've talked about the fact that behind every team is a SharePoint site. So if we assume that, you can see here, we are in a document library. And in that document library are a bunch of folder names. Those by default line up with your team channels. Now, the nice part here is we've got behind that the default column values, where you can do things like say, hey, every time a document gets added to this library, take this piece of metadata from the SharePoint site collection, like the owning organization, and apply it to that document. You can also apply your labels directly to everything that appears in that library. So two different things that you can set your defaults to. And here's an example of what it looks like to add your default tag. And here's what it looks like to add your default labels. So just so that you think about the fact that, we've got a channel when we've got a team here called marketing, and when I add something to the marketing channel, this particular channel within my team, I recognize that it's going to get stored inside of this document library, and the default values for that document library automatically get applied, putting the right metadata on that document, not relying the user to do that themselves. This is just an example, a very high level example of a process you might take in making sure that you're automatically applying things. Now, on the flip side, Joy called this out earlier, training. If you are not telling people, hey, this is what's happening to your content, they may not realize that they really do need to care about where documents are stored.
Yeah.
So it's very important to consider that process as you're doing it. All right. So, chats are deleted after X days. Are they actually stored as part of the default organization retention policy? Joy, do you know on the retention side of chats?
Chats that are deleted after X days, are they actually stored as part? They should be. If you've got a retention policy in place, it should adhere to that. And I have to say, I do find it painful. We've got a lot of organizations that treat chat too similar to Outlook emails.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll be a session one day too.
Hmm.
Because, oh, well, if you're going to say it in chats, just like you would have an email, so we're going to delete that after 30 days.
Mhm.
I find that painful, but that should. So you're saying like the default retention's 30 days, but I go in and I delete it. It should still hold true.
Nancy, if we're not getting a question, feel free to come off mute.
Verify that. Yeah.
All right.
No, you're getting the question. It just happens that we just have a 3-day retention deletion on chats. So it's very difficult.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So, where
But there's no way we can get to this so-called storage area.
Right. Yeah,
They're sure it's purging.
Yep. Yeah, the data that's stored in exchange with your chats, that is only accessible on the admin side, not by the users.
Yep.
And yeah, once that's purged, it's purged. Unfortunately, the battle that you have is we have to change how the organization treats these things if there's a mission critical reason to do so. And that is the battle I have seen time and time again across the state and local and federal space. It's a great question.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about, we've got about 10 or so minutes, depending on how soon, I think, was it Tim who's our moderator here, how soon he cuts us off. So let's talk about removing the IT burden. So when looking at what burden IT has, they generally have a burden on the provisioning side, because many organizations, especially in a regulated space, say, you know what, there's too much possibility of something getting used inappropriately. So if you want something, you got to request it from IT. They've got to provision it for you. Another area where there is often a burden on IT is on the life cycle side. Okay, and on the ongoing management side.
Hello.
That was a weird animation for the first animation in the deck. So when it comes down to that, you've got to think about how can we decrease the burden on IT without overpowering the end users. And a primary example, I said regulated space. One of our customers came to us. They would not turn Teams on until they had a way to make sure highly regulated data was protected inside of Teams. And that export control example is one that we worked on with them specifically. They wanted to make sure if there was going to be export control, not only could a user not share the document outside of the team, which means we had to really restrict what was possible on the SharePoint side, so knowing those checkboxes. They also wanted to make sure a user could not add simply anyone to that team. You can't add a foreign person to a workspace that has data that is restricted from foreign persons. And so knowing that meant users can't just go and create anything, because if a user can create something, they can become the owner. And if they can become the owner, they get to determine all of that information. And so working with them to understand those restrictions, you're able to then set those policies to protect that data. But that's very manual. So whether you do it with a third-party tool or you do it with the Power Platform, what we do as an example is we have a survey that you go ahead and in your survey capture information about how is this going to be used, about what sensitive information might there be. Are we going to allow external users? Questions along those lines. And with those types of questions, you can then direct people to the right areas of Microsoft 365. Hey, based on what you said, we're going to stand up a team for you. And that team is going to have a SharePoint backend. And on SharePoint, we are going to restrict the ability to share with people outside of the team. We are going to restrict the ability to add people to the owners group. Things along those lines. That method of asking your questions and then directing people to the right places, all programmatically, means, yes, there's a effort to stand it up in the beginning, but that means IT isn't checking every single time something comes in. They are not coming against another time where they have to ask 17 questions to the user and then going in manually and checking these boxes. And then probably a couple months later, going in, making sure someone didn't change it, right? So if we go back to this slide, and we say that as an organization, we've decided we need 3 types of workspaces: a team space, a project space, and an extranet space, something I can collaborate with people outside my organization. From a templating perspective, hey, these are the policies I want for each of those spaces. Programmatically, I can set that with scripting. I can set that with third-party tools. It doesn't really matter either way, right? It's possible for you to programmatically set all of that information, so that when the user goes in and says, I have a new request, I'm going to go to my service catalog, right? I'm not going to go to IT and say, please do this for me, Jane, please set this up for me. I'm going to go to my service catalog. I'm going to answer all of these questions because we've thought through that process. And as long as we didn't come up to an exception, and I'll talk about that in a second, you can use scripting, Power Platform, and third parties galore to automatically deploy that team, that SharePoint site, that Yammer community with the right metadata, with the right policies and permissions, etc. And all of that without IT having to get involved at all.
And a great place to start with some of that is look at the templates that are provided for you
Yes.
already. You'll notice, and I'm saying this completely off the cuff, but I believe every one of those Teams templates that's out there has multiple channels, right? Because a team is not going to be super efficient and super successful if everything gets crammed into the files tab of the general channel. All right, all of your conversation and all of your documents are going to be jumbled up mess. It's going to be hard to find what you're looking for. So you'll see that, like, that's metadata. That's identifying how that team works. So you can riff off of those, create one. We have a thing we use called a live template, right? But you could kind of use one of those. You could use that as your base, go
Yep.
in, use that as your template, customize it. That becomes your new template, right? You can always point to that, keep it fresh and help it meet the needs of the people that are out there. You've got some good options that can get you started in the platform. And then using your own, using Power Automate, using third-party tools like mine and Jay's companies make, you get some really good advantages that just layer on top of it.
Yep. And I mentioned exceptions. So one of the keys is, if you are going to go down this path, you're going to create a service catalog with predefined policies based on predefined answers. Do expect there will be exceptions and have a process for users to request support with those exceptions. And the goal here is not to disengage IT completely. It's to make IT able to focus on the exceptions and not the general rule, which means, I say this all the time, like, no SharePoint administrator ever in the 15 to 20 years I've been in this industry wanted to deal with permissions management.
Oh, Lord, no.
Right? But it became such a big part of our job because there was nothing out there doing it for us. So we
Yeah.
all looked for a third-party tool that would do as much of that as possible. Same thing here. Go to Power Platform and build the catalog for your user, or find a third party of your choice that gives you that kind of a catalog. And then you're right. Then just make sure there's an option. What you need isn't here. Go this way to submit your request. And yeah, people will get that that will be a slower process. But as long as you are continuing to grow the catalog, grow the capabilities you are offering people, then I think people will be grateful when they don't have to go through the exceptions process every time.
And if you're not sure, go to Microsoft Forums,
Mm,
create a survey, send that out to your user base. What do you wish was better when you need a new team, a new workspace, right?
yeah,
A
yeah,
space to collaborate. Get that information, talk to the business,
yep,
meet those needs, and you will be a hero in the
yeah,
organization.
yep. All right. So with the few minutes we have left, how do you stay on top of evolving features and functionalities? I'm going to be honest. If we really wanted to dig into this, this would be a workshop in and end of itself. So we're going to bring up one graphic with a couple of links for you. The graphic is the new Microsoft 365 roadmap, which I gotta tell you, as somebody who works in a space that is always behind the release schedule with the
Oh,
federal and the DoD, the changes they have made here, being able to filter by GCC, GCC High, and DoD has changed my life in following. Well, wait, is that available? Let me go look. I can actually look. And Microsoft is getting better too across the board. If you look at the Microsoft Teams monthly release blog in the tech community, at the bottom of that, there's a section for education. There's a section for frontline workers. There's a section for government. So across the board, they are getting better at announcing when new things are coming out. If you look in the documentation, you will find more references to DoD and GCC High and GCC again. So again, Microsoft recognizes that people are not all in commercial. So saying this is generally available across commercial that's not good enough. You need more. So these are a few resources that we recommend, which you can't click on right now, which is my fault. Should have thought of that. So we will make sure that this gets posted in the chat. That's what we'll do.
and the slides will be available in that
Sure.
email that I forward you. So Jay will upload the slides by midnight tonight. It will be
You will
available.
have slides, I promise.
Yes.
Couple of other things, Microsoft Learning Pathways, adoption.microsoft.com. The adoption.microsoft.com has become amazing in what is available there. Not just guides and how to use it, but examples. It's awesome. And then of
Oh,
course,
there are like a day in the life flashcards
that
in
yes,
adoption.microsoft.com. Just go, just go, just go. And
yeah.
then tweet us out and tell us how awesome we are for telling you about it.
We're so humble. And then I work for AvePoint. We have a whole learning series on Microsoft Teams. Joy, I'm sure you guys have something very similar as well. So
I don't know yet. I've been there 18 days. But we do have some awesome blogs. And in fact, Michael and David are actually speaking in this exact same time slot too.
oh, good. So they're not listening to us.
No, but Michael did put a tweet out there of the battle between our session and theirs. So if you
Oh,
don't follow at Joy of SharePoint, go follow Joy of SharePoint and make sure you respond that our session was better than theirs.
at least Joy's have.
Yeah.
Well, listen, thank you for joining us today. I believe we're at time if I've got my numbers correct. Sharing on this side of things is, oh, I love that background. Sharing on this side of things is one of my absolute favorite things to do. because I think that technologists are so often put in a position of having to do everything for everyone and so rarely given the resources necessary. And I don't just mean dollars or technology, but for example, having to define an information architecture for an organization without getting someone from legal to participate in that conversation.
Yeah.
Having to define your sensitivity labels without having to get someone from cybersecurity as part of the conversation. Like, it happens so often to us. I just love being able to get out and share how important that is. So thank
Do we
you.
have a couple of minutes for questions, or are we?
Yep.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, we have about 6 minutes. So if you just give me about 2 minutes at the end, we should be good.
Perfect. So
Well,
yes,
if there's questions, we're here, and if there's not, we go away.
we're
back
here
into the
anyway.
ether. No.
I'm going to put our Twitter handles in the chat.
Oh yeah. And Tim, if you want to just do your thing now, and if questions come up, we'll take
Sure.
them after your thing is done.
Yep, go ahead and come off mute or throw them in the chat if you do have questions. But thank you guys very much. It was an excellent presentation, a ton of information. I feel like every time I go through one of these admin days, I learn so much that I forget small pieces of my childhood. So it's there's only so much brain capacity, right? All right, so let's go ahead and pick the winner here. I'm gonna go ahead and share my magic wheel spinner, and we are going to see. You guys.
Are those all the people who asked questions during the session?
Yep, everybody that participated.
And are those trees the prize? I'm just kidding.
All right, Jason. Congratulations. Jason, if you want this to be sent to a different email address other than what you registered with, then go ahead and reach out to me. You can either ping me through Teams. If that doesn't work, I'm Tim at MN365.org.
And Jason, are you a Southerner, or do you just use the best, most inclusive term, y'all, that's ever been? I need to know, because I'm from Florida and Alabama, so I'm just curious.
Thank you much. No, my dad's actually from Tennessee, so I learned it from him.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like this is my time as a Southerner to shine, because they get on to us now if we say, like, you guys. So I mean, now I can actually get up on a stage anywhere in the world and go, hi, y'all.
Yes.
And
yes.
it's great.
I spent 7 years in Texas, and I learned the phrase y'all, and I don't know how not to use it. Like, when I don't say that, I feel awkward. So
it is handy.
Yeah.
So handy.
Thank you, by the way.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. And remember, there's going to be a survey that goes out at the end of the day. I'm going to step on Tim's toes. So please, please, please fill it out, because things only get better if we get feedback.
Yep, I'll drop that in the chat right now.
Oh, Tim, why are you slacking so much?
I know it's getting that late in the day, right?
My shoulders are heavy from the bird. Oh.
And then I'm also going to throw the speaker board out there too, so you can view what sessions are going on at the 2:30 slot.
Awesome.
So when you make sure you fill out the survey, and if you guys are sticking around here, we got about 3 minutes. If you want to ask any more questions, I might throw up my slides here for the next session here in a couple seconds. But thank you very much again. We really appreciate you guys.
Absolutely our pleasure. I speak on Joy's behalf. It's our pleasure.
Yes. No, it's great.
Thanks, everybody.
Talking is my favorite thing anyway, so I'm talking and I'm hopefully being useful and helpful. So it's win-win-win. Why is this GIF not cooperating? There's Ben now.
I'm here.
Awesome.
Welcome
Well,
back, Ben.
So I'm in Florida, so can we say all y'all too?
All y'all. Now, I find personally, maybe it's the Alabama side of the world, that all y'all comes up if you're like, y'all need to listen. All y'all better pay attention.
It's like your mom
Very
using your full name.
Ooh, yeah, it's better pay attention. It's serious.
More authority
I-
behind it.
I think I'm slowly falling into. I grew up in Michigan, and I moved down to
Mm.
Florida like 13 years ago. And I think every once in a while now the y'all slips in, but
Oh, it'll get you. Mhm.
I still tend to use the everyone or all of you, or I still have my Midwest roots.
That's a lot of words. All
It's
of
a
you,
lot of words.
It is a lot of words.
y'all.
Yeah.
Just rolls off the tongue. Now, what part of Florida are you in now?
I'm in Jacksonville.
Okay, groovy. Pensacola is my hometown.
Yeah. Sorry, what was that?
Pensacola.
Oh, you were Pensacola. Oh, so you got to see the Blue Angels fly all the time then.
All the time. My brother still lives there, and he'll be like, "Hey, little sister, I'm at the lighthouse. They're practicing today." I'm like, "Oh,
So cool. We had the air show here 2 or 3 weeks ago, and one of their passes